Hello, everyone. I'm Will Rycroft, and this is genuinely one of my favourite days of the year. It is the Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize shortlist reveal, and that means that I get to speak to all 6 of the shortlisted authors. And this year's cohort is so global and covers so many different time zones that we have actually had to do 2 separate recordings because otherwise somebody would have had to speak to us at about 4 a.m. And I don't think that's very fair. So you will hear me speaking to 3 authors and then another 3 authors, but you really want to hear from all of them because these are some of the most exciting new voices in fiction, and they're going to have fantastic things to say about their books. I'm not going to waffle on. We want to hear from the authors, and I'm going to ask them each to say hello and introduce their books, and we will do this alphabetically because that seems fair, which means that, Kaveh, I'm coming to you first. Please tell us all about your book.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Will. It's my luck to get to be here among these writers and my luck to get to be with you all. My name is Kaveh Akbar. I was born in Iran. I live in the United States. And my book is called Martyr with an exclamation point. It is about a young man, Cyrus Shams, who's recently orphaned, recently sober, who decides that he's not particularly attached to the idea of remaining alive anymore. And he wants to give his life meaning by dying in a meaningful way. He's just not sure what that meaningful way is yet. This takes him on a journey that leads him to a visual artist, a performance artist who's her last performance is a performance of her own death, which so she's dying in the Brooklyn Museum, and people can come and talk to her about what it's like to only have a couple weeks left to live. And so Cyrus goes to speak with her about dying, thus initiating a series of adventures and misadventures that create and resolve certain mysteries about both of their lives.
Fantastic elevator pitch. It's going to be hard to beat, Kaveh, but let's see what we can do. I'm going to come to you now, Kalyan. Please tell us all about your book.
Well, thank you. Well, it's so exciting to be here. I am. I'm feeling slightly hysterical, so I'm sorry if that comes across in the elevator pitch. I'm Kalyan Bradley. I'm the author of The Ministry of Time, which I often describe as a time travel romance about empire, bureaucracy, and cigarettes. Mostly because when I describe it like that, people look puzzled and leave me alone. It's about an experiment is being run by the British government to test the physiological and psychological effects of time travel. So they've started ripping from the past people who would have died in their own timelines as kind of time refugees, and they're forced to assimilate to the 21st century and become good British citizens, ideal 21st century British citizens. To help them do that, they are assigned someone called a Bridge, who is a civil servant who will live with them, monitor them, report on them, but also help them assimilate. And the novel is told by one of the Bridges, a British Cambodian woman with a very complicated relationship to power structures and to the British state, as well as her own heritage. And the expat, the time refugees that she's assigned, a man called Graham Gore, who's pulled from a doomed Arctic expedition I know perhaps slightly too much about because I got very, very invested in polar exploration during lockdown.
Excellent stuff. Ferdia, I'm coming to you now. Please tell us all about your book.
Hello. So thanks a million, Will. My name's Freddie Lennon, and I'm the author of Glorious Exploits. Glorious Exploits is a work of historical fiction set in 412 BC Sicily. And basically the real historical event is that Athens invaded the island, was unexpectedly catastrophically defeated, and thousands of Athenian prisoners were then held in these limestone quarries outside of the city of Syracuse. And we know from the historical record that some of these Athenians actually survived by quoting lines from Euripides' plays, because the Sicilians were completely in love with Athenian drama, in particular the work of Euripides. And my novel follows 2 such theatre-obsessed potters, Lampo and Gelon, who descend into this open-air prison, looking for snatches from the hits of the Athens stage. And basically they decide that's not enough, that they're going to try to put on a production of Euripides' Medea. And antics ensue.
I just love, we just heard about 3 books that couldn't be more different from each other. And yet all of them have found real fans amongst the booksellers at Waterstones. What's going to guide us through this conversation is what they have to say about these books. This is a prize which is absolutely run by our booksellers. Their passion for these books, often read in proof form, before they've hit the shelves, is what has sort of driven these things along. And they've got so many fascinating things to say about why they've connected to these books and why they want to sort of push them into other people's hands. So, Kaveh, I'm going to come to you first. Robin, one of our booksellers in Putney, said that the way that Martyr talks about addiction and depression are really moving and carefully handled. As you sort of spoke about in your pitch, like, this is a book that's really dealing with, matters of life and death. How do you write about those things, not just with a sort of sensitivity, but also with humor, which does absolutely run through this book?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Robin, for the generous framing of that question. That's an extraordinarily, it's a gift to be read at all, let alone be read well. Thank you for that, Robin. When Ferdia was talking, I was thinking about the Roman poet Horace, who said, famously, "Dulce et utile," right? Like writing should dulce et utile, right? Writing should be sweet and useful, or writing should delight and instruct, is how it's often translated, right? And I think that the whole game is saying the difficult existential things. I mean, I think about death a lot. I think about addiction and recovery a lot for the obvious reasons. And I want to write about those things without it feeling like a vegetable that you have to eat, without it feeling like, a pill that you have to take. Like, I know this will be good for me. It won't be very fun. I want to write about these things. And the art is in figuring out how to tell those stories and discuss those topics in a way that delights, as it offers a modicum of instruction, which I don't mean didactically. I just mean an encounter with an unprecedented experience unlike your own that can grow your imagination towards non-you people, remind you that people who aren't you have interiorities as vivid as your own. And if it is possible to do that without delight, I've not encountered it in any art form. The comedian Richard Pryor also said he wanted to get you laughing so your mouth would be open when he poured the poison down. Um, and it's wonderful, right? And I think that, he's functionally paraphrasing Horace, right? And so that's something that I take really seriously, that compact with the reader, that if you are giving me a measure of your time, your most irreplenishable resource, then I owe you delight and instruction. That is, the opportunity cost of reading a novel has never been greater. You know what I mean? Like, you can look on YouTube and learn how to tango, or, learn, German enough to order at a restaurant in the time that it takes to read a novel, right? In the 10, 12 hours, whatever, right? And so I want you to do those things if my novel isn't as engaging to you. Know what I mean? It's not your fault if those things are more interesting than my novel, and so I want to create an engaging, dynamic experience. That's a really important part of the art object for me.
That's a fantastic answer, Kaveh. Thank you so much. Kalyan, I have a comment here from a bookseller called Izzy in Bristol, which I know you're going to love because we've spoken previously, and I know that the author that she mentions is one of your favourites. Bradley manages to do that incredibly precious Pratchett-esque thing where her work doesn't sacrifice either humour or serious themes for the other, but balances both. How does it feel to be compared to the great Terry Pratchett?
Simply the greatest feeling on earth. She's the wind beneath my wings. Tell her thank you. Really, really wonderful. Obviously, Terry Pratchett has influenced me an almost impossible degree because I started reading him when I was 10 years old, and I've just been reading him ever since, back and forth, and rereading the Discworld novels. And I do think being a reader is such an important part of being a writer, and feeling as if you are in conversation with and part of a long link of other writers. In many ways, I feel like I am writing mostly for other writers because I like the idea of readers coming to my book and then coming to another book that sounds like it might be playing off it or has some friction with it. It's funny that Kaveh, you were just talking about the seriousness of humour and the use of humour. There's a Terry Pratchett quote I use quite a lot, where I think he may have even been quoting G.K. Chesterton, another great English comic novelist, that laughter can get through the keyhole when seriousness is still banging at the door. And it's this idea that issues that can be very difficult to approach, that can feel triggering or painful or even difficult and confrontational when you try to approach them straight. It's sometimes easier to deliver or to sneak around them and get around them when you're trying to approach it with humor. The other thing I think is really important about humor is that laughter is an instinct reaction, right? It's a gut reaction. We laugh and because we are immediately touched. Fake laughter is so obvious, and fake bad jokes land so badly and poorly. When laughter really works, it's because something in us has been hit to the quick. I love that Richard Pryor quote, by the way, Kaveh. I'm going to be using that. When I was writing The Ministry of Time, I was also simultaneously trying to write a really serious, inverted commas, novel about Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge and Cambodian refugees to Britain, because I thought I had an obligation to as a British Cambodian person. And it wasn't fun and it was very painful. But I think what I was thinking about in The Ministry of Time instead, about power structures and refugees and the British state, it felt like a way to approach exactly the same topic, but with a kind of playfulness.
Ferdia, so many booksellers loved the Irish colloquialisms that litter through your book. And Claire, a bookseller in Farnham, loved the fact that it was thoroughly modern despite being rooted in ancient history, and loved that, of course, we live in a time where there's a lot of Greek retellings out there. But she's a classicist, and she said the author managed to capture the cheeky, playful nature of the poets and playwrights of ancient Greece. Tell me a little bit about, I suppose, what is a fresh take on this idea of Greek retellings.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Claire. That's lovely to hear that, and extra nice that, she's a classicist and picked up on that. Yeah, that was kind of important for me. The reason for the Irish voice, I wanted to kind of jolt the reader a little bit. So I think in general, when you think of work set in the ancient Greek or the Roman world, the default setting is almost to imagine the lords from Downton Abbey, and just go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But like today, these were very complex, very diverse cultures. People, post-colonial, you had colonization, immigration, slavery, different classes. So I wanted to. Sicily had been colonized by mainland Greece a few hundred years before my book is set. So Hiberno English, as well as coming quite naturally to me as someone from Dublin, I felt actually was a way to convey that sense of like Syracuse in relation to the rest of the Greek world. And likewise, the kind of contemporary voice, these people are, I couldn't write it in ancient Greek, or at least I don't think the booksellers would have been as much of a fan. So yeah, you need to pick a point, and they're contemporary to themselves. So I think a contemporary voice made sense. And I remember reading Aristophanes' plays, which are the only plays about the people from like contemporary Athens. And modern translations are very sweary, they're very ribald, exuberant. And it just kind of struck me that was something that was kind of missing a little bit. Yeah, there was the kind of formal way of rendering that period. Actually, there was a path in the original comedies that I wanted to run with.
And just to develop that a bit further, there's a fantastic comment from another bookseller called Eliza in Carmarthen. And they said, it speaks to something within all of us, the desire to be remembered, to become something bigger than ourselves, which I thought was a fantastic comment about your book, because there is this shift in tone towards the end of the book where it becomes very, very moving. Tell me a little bit about, I suppose, handling that shift in tone and this idea of posterity, because in a way, as writers, you're all committing words to page, potentially to survive into posterity.
Yeah, thanks very much, Eliza. And that's why I write the book, for millennia down the line. No, but I'm playing the long game. But yeah, I mean, I suppose that's definitely something I think that's a good thing to pick up on. These are Lampo, the main character, is this kind of unemployed potter. He lives with his mom. When he's in his 30s, things haven't quite worked out the way that he would have hoped. but he sees maybe this theatrical endeavor and the various things that ensue as an opportunity maybe to become more or do more. And I think that sense of ambition and possibility is something that, whether it's, I always feel like, the human mind hasn't really changed very much at all, which is why we can read these ancient plays or ancient histories or comedies and it still hits something because, culture may change, but the kind of a lot of the basic dynamics remain kind of remarkably consistent. And yeah, the shift in comedic tone, it almost came naturally from the events, rather than going, I'm going to stick a joke in here, wait a few beats, have another joke. It sprang from the narrative and what the characters were experiencing. So I think Lampo is a guy almost who operates as if he's in a comedy and everyone else feels they're in a tragedy until eventually it begins to kind of overwhelm him and he kind of realizes what's going on. But thanks, it's a really good comment.
Kaveh, I'm going to come to you now because weirdly this question is sort of connected. Victoria in Crewe said, Martyr really captures what it means to live and to love, to try and capture greatness in a painful world, the looming presence of death and living in spite of it. That powerful desire to live is something really important, I think, to the book. Tell me a little bit about writing that into the novel.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to put too autobiographical of a thumb on the scale in these kinds of conversations, but one is yoked to their obsessions, I think. And, um, I am a person who has not always felt particularly attached to remaining alive. And in those moments, um, one still wants to be useful, like my lifetime of attempting at ethical rigor doesn't isn't evacuated when my desire to be alive is, and so if one wants to leave the world, one tries to imagine towards doing so in a way that will create the least harm and perhaps even be useful. And beginning to explore those ideas in my own consciousness led to me writing them because that's how my brain works, is I write to find out what I think, not the other way around. And so I started writing this book and, these characters started talking to each other and I don't want to, give away too much of the book, but you will have read it if you're watching this, one imagines. But, I when Cyrus, this character who's sort of having this dalliance with suicidality, starts having these conversations with the terminally ill woman, who there's no Faustian bargain that she can make that will buy her another hour, and the relative frippery of his perspective becomes really eclipsing, the frivolity of thinking that mortality is an inertia that would need to be inorganically disrupted, is in stark contrast to her, just dying before him, right? And so he says, I want to, make my dying useful, but I'm not particularly religious. So, like, can we talk about some secular martyrs? And she says, and that voice, that kind of cringy voice, or that sort of like, wizened elder voice is not the voice that lives inside my head. But writing that character, it was impossible to hear Cyrus's perspective, which at a time was my perspective, without hearing her voice too. You know what I mean? Like, it really was this kind of, I don't mean to sound Pollyanna or sort of pie in the sky, but it really was kind of salvific in its way, right? Like, I met this character fairly organically in my writing that cast my own perspectives into a relief that made being alive seem like a rational decision, right?
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you, Kaveh. Kalyan, I have another comment from a bookseller, which again, I know you're going to love. Yasmin in Islington said, I genuinely have not fallen in love with a fictional character this hard in a very long time. I cannot put into words or express how charming, witty, and delightful the character of Graham Gore was. Kalyan, I know that you're a Graham Gore girly, and I'm going to give you a chance once again to explain why this man has such a hold on you.
Thanks, Will. And I'm so glad to hear that this is happening. And I'm just going to do something very creepy, which is roll slightly to one side and reveal Graham Gore over my shoulder.
He's behind you.
He's watching me at all times, very annoyed about what I've done to him. Sorry, Graham. I do sometimes feel like I should like hold some kind of séance and apologise to the actual historical figure. So it is a little embarrassing sometimes to have to explain that I wrote a book because I became deranged for a couple of years. I suppose it's as good a genesis as any. So Graham Gore, what is the hold that Graham Gore holds on me? Sometimes I think this entire publicity tour is just me doing therapy in public as I try to work out what exactly kind of hold this imperialist colonist has on me. So Graham Gore, just in case anyone listening does not know about the background, was a British naval officer in the 19th century, not a very well-known one, not an important part of history, a footnote, really. He has entered history mostly because of his death. In 1845, 2 ships and 129 men sailed to the Arctic to try and discover the Northwest Passage, a passage through the Arctic that would have linked Britain with the trading kingdoms of Asia, and they all vanished. They all died in the Arctic. They never came home. We didn't find the ships until 2014 and 2016, I think. And Graham was among them. And he was one of the officers. And I was learning about this expedition, which was fascinating. It was fascinating to me because of the stupidity and the hubris, but also the kind of strangeness, and I suppose what is unfortunately the romance of it, the romance of dying stupidly. The British people love it when someone dies stupidly in the name of going to somewhere cold. Robert Falcon Scott, we love that guy. He failed to get to the South Pole first, killed the entire party. We love him. We love you, Franklin. We love your men who had to eat each other in the Arctic. We love it. But so I became very intensely obsessed with this expedition, and I became very intensely obsessed with this officer on it, just because I'd gone to his Wikipedia page to look up his name, which seemed interesting to me. And I saw the picture of him, the only picture that we've got, a very cheeky smile, curly hair, and his description by the people who'd sailed with him that he was a very competent, highly competent, very kind man who was very good at his job, which, during a lockdown, I thought, God, I bet that guy would be great to have around the place. He could sort out my VPN because I can't and I'm crying. And it just kind of developed from there. One thing, if you get very into British polar exploration, you do have to get very into facing up to the fact that what you're interested in is an enormous imperialist project. They weren't up there for good reasons. They did not ask the Inuit about dying in their lands, or indeed whether they could tramp through them, changing the names, trying to take advantage. The reality of the imperial project placed against these attributes that apparently set him off as kind and competent was so fascinating to me, and there was a kind of crunchy strangeness in trying to sit with them that, I don't know, I ended up writing a book about it. With just a red mist descended, and then later there were 90,000 words.
I feel as night falls that we should maybe leave Kalyan and her picture of Graham Gore in peace. But before we finish off, I just wanted to sort of say that obviously, because this is an award that really is in the hands of the booksellers, I wonder what it's like for you as debut authors. Sending a book out into the world is a scary enough thing. What is it like, I suppose, to have the support of people like booksellers so vociferously when your book is going out there? Kaveh, I'll come to you first. What's it been like, especially as an American author, to know that there are English booksellers over here who just love what you've written?
To be honest, it's a little bit of a baffle that anyone who isn't blood related to me reads the things that I write still. Again, the opportunity cost of reading, I've been a poet my whole life. I've always only ever thought of myself as a poet, really, since I was quite young, actually. And if I hand you a poem, you can read it in a minute or two, or if it's a long poem, a few minutes, right? But I mean, I've never written the Aeneid, right? I mean, my poems aren't of such duration or volume, right? And so the opportunity cost is not so vertiginous. And the idea to have written a novel that people are not only reading but stewarding, like shepherding into people's lives. I mean, one creates art. The highest plane of success for a piece of art, to my mind, is that it might practically be useful in someone else's life who you'll never meet. It might be practically useful in a stranger's life, make it more, illuminate something, usefully complicate something. And I don't make that happen, right? It's the booksellers and the librarians and the people who are actually, doing that shepherding, doing that stewardship, who make that happen, right? That is realizing the greatest potential of the book. It is, I've never been the beneficiary of a burning bush or an angel's clarion trumpet, right? Like, these are the miracles that I have known, that, I can read work by Enheduanna, who lived 43 centuries ago, right? And because of people who have stewarded into the present, I can find myself, it's like Ferdia was saying, right? I can find amongness in a woman who lived in a world that is completely dissimilar from my own, but who had a psychic life that is shockingly symmetrical to mine, right? It is the work of historians and librarians and booksellers who make those connections, who create those synapses, and those are the miracles that I have known.
Ferdy, I'll come to you with the sort of same question. What is it like to have that sort of support as you head out as a debut author?
Yeah, thanks a million. And that's a really lovely response there by Kaveh, and it expresses it somewhat brilliantly. This, yeah, it means a huge amount. Before I ever, set out to kind of write books, I was a voracious reader, and bookshops have been kind of like a solace. They've been kind of fundamental for me at various points in my life and ongoing. I always, if I go to a new city, I'll find the bookshop. I'll search them out, and booksellers likewise, in introducing me to certain writers that I otherwise wouldn't have known, introducing me to books that I wouldn't have heard about. So you just realize that they really form a crucial part in keeping books alive and getting writers out there. So knowing that my work, this kind of strange thing that I've been plugging away at for many years, has resonated with these booksellers in that way, and they're championing it. Yeah, it's just really moving. It's incredible for me. And as I said, it's that specific, like a bookseller-led award. It's quite unique and quite special.
Kalyan, of course, you've been a bookseller. So what is it like now to be on the other side?
This is just the most exciting thing. So I was, in fact, a Waterstones bookseller among other bookshops that I worked at. So I used to work at the Gower Street Waterstones in London, and as a result, I have first-hand experience of how much booksellers are nodes, really, in a map, in a community of readers. I know that we often talk about writing being a very lonely role. It wasn't for me. I had a very specific experience in which I was writing for a very small group of friends, and then the book got out of control, and it's been read by slightly more than 15 people now, which was its original audience. So writing wasn't the only experience. And we also sometimes think about reading as being a completely solitary pleasure. And it is a solitary and it's a private pleasure, but it is, readers are all alone together. We are a community. And that never really happens, and that can't happen without the presence of booksellers. I trust the recommendations of booksellers almost more than I trust the recommendations of anyone else, because they are plunged neck deep into the lives of their readers and the interactions of the community. I have some very, very fond and sometimes probably not suitable for the podcast memories of being a bookseller and what it's like to be on that shoreline between the readership and the writer. So I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled. I could not be more. It's not even flattered. Isn't even the right word. I feel astonishingly supported, astonishingly grateful that booksellers who have so much to read and so much to do. Their job isn't just sitting around behind desks looking literary. It's a huge work of stock taking and remembering people and thinking about recommendations and thinking about the kind of architecture of literary culture within a building, to have the fact that they've taken time out from that to say, this book's pretty good, actually. I could not be more grateful.
Excellent. Well, it's really, really good to hear that. That's what I love about this prize, is that it really is sort of booksellers, passionate readers, really wanting to champion the books that excite them the most. They read a lot of books, and these are the 6 books this year that they're most excited about. So just to recap for those watching what those books are and what they look like, it is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, The Ministry of Time by Kalyan Bradley, and Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. There we go. I can't thank you enough, all of you, for telling us a little bit more about your work and the books and how they came to be. Through the wonders of technology, we are now going to go back in time to the conversation I had earlier this afternoon with the other 3 authors. And through the magic of, I think, hopefully this will lead to a lovely, clean edit point, I'm now going to hand you over to Josie.
Right. Well, to start with, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited about the Waterstones Prize and about just being here. So my book is called The Silence in Between. It's historical fiction, and it's inspired by several true stories. It's about a woman, Lisette, who is separated from her baby when the border between East and West Berlin is closed overnight in August 1961. Lisette has also a teenage daughter called Ellie, and it's actually Ellie who decides to somehow escape East Berlin, find her baby brother in the West, and bring him home again. The book has a dual timeline, so there's also a parallel story that unfolds during World War II in Berlin, when Lisette herself is a young woman, and what she experiences during the war and immediately afterwards. I should also mention that the silence in between the title comes from something that Mozart said, which was that music isn't found in the notes, but in the silence in between. And there's a very strong theme about music and silence. So, yeah.
Fantastic, Josie. Thank you so much. Hanako, I'm coming to you now. Tell us all about your book.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for shortlisting me. It's a real honour. I'm very sorry, I've got a hacking cough at the moment, so if I splutter, please forgive me. So I'm the author of Mongrel. Mongrel is a story that follows 3 Japanese women and their interweaving lives. We have May, who loses her mother, her Japanese mother at age 6. And she grows up in suburban Surrey, where she yearns to fit in. And in doing so, she suppresses her heritage and also her growing desire for her best friend, Fran. Then we have Yuki, who leaves Japan to pursue her dream of becoming a concert violinist in London. And it's there that she sort of falls under the spell of her music teacher. And then we have Haruka, who attempts to navigate the underworld of the Tokyo nightlife scene, where she's a hostess in the bars and clubs there, working in the city's sex district. And she's grieving a mother who's hid a lot of secrets from her until one of those secrets comes to light. And so, yeah, it follows those 3 women and their interweaving narratives.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And rounding things off now, we have Rebecca. Rebecca, please tell us all about your book.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me as well. My book is Greta and Valdin. It's a literary comedy, and it's about 2 siblings, one who is 25 and one who's just turning 30, and they're living in an apartment together at quite a turbulent time in both of their lives where, well, for the older one, most of his 20s problems have sort of been solved now, and now he doesn't know what to do next. And his younger sister, who is just sort of like in a messy phase. And it's just about them and their family and everything they get up to in one calendar year. I don't think anyone's ever said that about the book, but it does begin at the beginning of the year and end at the end of the year.
An important detail for people to understand. Excellent. Well, listen, it's great to hear those sort of elevator pitches for your books. It's so mean to make an author, after years of hard work, try and distill their book into sort of 60 seconds, but you've all done a fantastic job there. The Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize is very much driven by our booksellers and their passion to find and discover and recommend new writers. And so over the last few months, they have been reading often proof copies of your novels. Josie, for example, your book is yet to come out as we speak. So that's what's been passed around. And then we asked them to sort of talk about the books that have got them really excited. And so, in fact, in this conversation, what I'm going to be doing is sharing some of the things that they've been saying about your books. And then we can sort of find a way to talk about the books through those comments. So, Josie, I'm going to come to you first of all. One of our booksellers, Mark, who's based in Glasgow, said that he described your book as a compelling and tragic tale where hope never falters, even through the most dramatic of obstacles put in their way. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about, I suppose, writing about hope, about people maintain that hope, even in the most extreme of circumstances.
Right, that's a very good question. I had so many inspirations for this book, but one of them was this wonderful book called The War on Women. And that one had such an impact on me, and it's by Sue Lloyd Roberts, and it's such a powerful and important book, and it's all about, well, the war on women and what has happened to them over centuries. And but what I love most about the book is how women show such bravery in the face of unspeakable horrors, and somehow do manage to find that hope and do manage to survive. And that was something that I wanted this book to rip people's hearts apart, but I also wanted it to stitch them back together. So it's a journey, and it's one specific woman, it's her journey. But of course, I hope that it sort of represents a lot of women's journeys who have gone through these unspeakable things in history. And I just think it's a really important thing to hold on to is hope, of course.
Mm. And Hanako, we had a comment from one bookseller called Chloe, who's based in Cheltenham, and obviously your novel, as you described, is also about women. And Chloe loved the fact that it addressed really, really important subjects and didn't pull its punches. It had some really good stuff in there. But she also mentioned that she really loved the writing on a technical level, and she could see how it started as a screenplay. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that process and why it ended up becoming a novel.
Yeah, so I've been an actor since I was 18. And when I first started acting, it became very clear to me that my lived experience as a mixed race person, as a half Japanese woman, was not being celebrated or seen in any form of media. And that became glaringly obvious when I started getting cast in things or not cast in things. And I would be told that because of my ethnicity, I was too difficult to cast and I would never be in a period drama and all of this stuff. And so I desperately sort of tried to look as white as possible. And then when the Asian roles started trickling in, I was told that I didn't look Asian enough. And so sort of got to the point where I was like, well, I could just cry about this all the time in my room, or I could do something about it. So I decided to write a TV pilot. And as I was writing the character descriptions for the pitch deck, lockdown happened and I wasn't able to go out there and sort of meet these phantom producers. And so I kept on writing these character descriptions and they turned into prose. And at some point I was like, oh, well, I suppose maybe I'm writing a book. But really, I had no intention of writing a novel. I never thought I could write a novel. I never wanted to be a novelist. It really actually came out of necessity to see my lived experience, the people that I love and know, their lived experience out in the world. And although it feels like quite a roundabout way of getting a story told, writing a book, because it takes years and years, it was really the only way in which I could tell this story where it wouldn't be sanitized or dumbed down. So yeah, that's how it came about.
Rebecca, I'm going to come to you now, actually, because there was something about what Hanako was saying there about representing a specific experience that was important for her. And one of our booksellers, Emily in Wolverhampton, said that the thing that she loved about your book was the specificity of the Russian Maori sort of Auckland cultural context. And it was that it wasn't about having this distance between the reader and that experience, but it was actually the specificity and that unique, quirky, and very gloriously queer family, she says, in all its unconventional joy. She felt that it was like being invited in to that family. Could you tell me a little bit about writing that kind of very specific cultural context and how that is actually the thing that makes it accessible to a reader who doesn't have any experience of that?
I think that sometimes when you are living that life, like as an Indigenous person or as a mixed race person or as a queer person, you often don't really think about it in your own sort of day-to-day, like going around, until you encounter other people and they sort of tell you what you are and that sort of thing. So I think when I'm writing, I'm not sort of thinking about who is this reader going to be and are they not going to understand like my perspective or, you know, something that I am writing about. I don't really think about whether the reader is going to relate to that. I think because especially when you're writing a first book, you don't really have anything to lose. Like the only thing that can happen is that no one publishes it. There's not going to be, you know, when you're sort of in your Word doc and you've never been published before, you don't really know any other writers or anything. You're not thinking, oh, are people going to sort of find this too difficult to understand because they've never lived this experience? You're just thinking like, oh, this like pretty funny thing happened to me on the bus earlier. I think that I could maybe include something like that in this book.
Yeah. Is there a sense as well that, I mean, often people talk about how with the debut book, with your first novel, there's a sense of almost your life experience, like everything kind of goes into it. Did you feel, and I'll bring this around to sort of all of you really, whether that was part of the drive in writing, was like wanting to get a lot of stuff in there?
Not for me, because I assumed that my first book would not be very good. So I was thinking of it as like sort of like a, you know, like a first pancake, that I was not wanting to use like my best ideas or anything, especially if people said that they were bad, because I hadn't been writing or involved with like a writing scene or anything before I did this.
Yeah.
So I was like holding a lot of stuff back and then sort of more like testing the waters, I think, which now like I haven't written a second book, and this book came out in New Zealand 3 years ago last week. So I don't know.
There's plenty of time for the second pancake. We'll just wait patiently for it. And Hanako, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that I poured my heart and soul into this. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of the stuff that happens in the novel to these characters have not happened to me. I'm not a mother. I've not been a sex worker. My mother is still very much alive, thank God. But I think thematically these things occupy my mind on a daily basis. And so, yes. I mean, it was sort of like a cathartic word vomit, which I then sort of organised into a hopefully good way.
This was the elevator pitch we were hoping for earlier, Hanako.
This is really good, right?
Yeah.
Word vomit. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to say really, because like Rebecca said, I've never written anything before, so there was this like blissful ignorance that I was just going in with this story, and it sort of evolved as I evolved with it. I didn't have a structure. I didn't have an idea of where the story really went or who these women were. They sort of revealed themselves to me. And in doing so, I revealed parts of myself to myself, I guess. And yeah, now there's a question of book 2, and it's sort of like, oh God, I don't know. I don't bloody know. The first one was exhausting. But it is that greenness that you have at the beginning of the journey that allows you to do that, because you don't know how high the mountain is until you're halfway up it, and then you're like, well, I better carry on then. Does that answer your question?
It's a very good answer to a question. Josie, I'm going to come to you now, because as we were saying earlier, your book is sort of, about to hit shelves. How are you feeling?
Everything went into this book for me. And it was, I wrote it during COVID and in Singapore. So I'm based in Singapore at the moment. And the borders closed completely. And my family, I'm Swedish and Scottish, and my family live in Sweden and Scotland. So I was actually separated from them for 2 years. And in that time, I got pregnant, had a baby, and my son was almost 2 when my family met him for the first time. So writing about this whole sort of being separated, from your family, that was, everything went into it, because I was experiencing it, not in the same way. I wasn't separated from my child, thank God, but it was, I'm very close to my family, and it was a really, really tough time. So there was a lot that came from the heart with all of the writing. So everything went into this one.
Excellent. One of our booksellers, Leonie in Russington, was saying about your book, and I'll sort of quote this directly so that you can respond. She said, I adored the exploration of personalities told through their own personal music and sounds. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and that sort of approach to writing character?
Yeah, so this is something that I worry that some people are going to hate it, but so far people seem to like it. So what happened is that I read this viral Reddit post about this girl who said, I've been watching Dexter, and my boyfriend turned to me halfway through and said, I love this show, but it's so unrealistic, the whole internal monologue. And she looked at him and she said, what do you mean? I mean, we all have an internal monologue. And he just said, no, we don't. I don't. And so she then went on to Reddit and said, is he a psychopath, my boyfriend? What's going on? And the next thing that happened, there were thousands of people who replied to this thread. And it turns out that no, a lot of people only think in images. Others only have verbal thoughts, and the majority have both. And I was so fascinated by this, because it's very, very noisy in my head. I have a constant Bridget Jones internal monologue. So I was fascinated that there were people who could think differently. And then I started to sort of do research about that. And then I started to read about people who have, synesthesia, who, can sort of taste colors and all these different ways of thinking. And I started to wonder whether it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone could think in music. I mean, sometimes I can walk down the street, I'm obviously hearing my own soundtrack going on. So I imagine then this character of being able to sort of hear people's songs. And I meant it more as a quirky characteristic than some sort of, fantasy sort of part of the book. And and it just sort of developed from there. And I come from quite a musical family. I'm the least musical of them all, but me and my best friend, we sort of communicate with songs. We'll sort of send each other WhatsApp messages or just sending each other songs. And it's a big part of my life. And I thought I would sort of go in and see if that could work as a person's characteristic. So yes, one of the characters, she essentially hears people's songs every time she meets someone. And her mother used to be a really good pianist. And then she one day stops playing the piano, and Ellie, the daughter, doesn't really know why. And that's one of her sort of quests, is to try and figure out what happened to her mother, and why this one thing that could have brought them together has actually pulled them apart. So
fascinating stuff. It's really interesting. My son asked me recently, he said, when you hear the voice in your head, like your internal monologue, is it your voice or is it in a different voice? And I was like, I've never thought of this before in my life. And I thought of, I almost didn't know really. I wasn't quite sure. I was like, I think it's my voice. Certainly when it's a critical voice, that's definitely my voice. But yeah, no, it's a really odd one, that, but fascinating way of approaching character. Rebecca, I want to come to you now because a bookseller called Luna in Glasgow had a fantastic and very pithy thing to say about your book. Very gay, very fun, very joyful. And I just thought it was such a lovely thing to say about a book, to have something which is, we've been talking about some, quite serious themes, but to have something that is full of fun and joy. Can you tell us a little bit about, I suppose, creating that sense in writing? Is it just a question, as you were sharing earlier, of sort of sharing these things that just happen to be fun to you? Or were you sort of really determined to write a book that was very gay, very fun, and very joyful?
No, I actually think that a lot of the time I think that what I'm writing is really sad. And then people react by being like, oh, that's so funny. Who would think such a thing? Or like, who would do that? And the answer is always me. I would do that. Yeah, so obviously like some parts of the book where I wanted it to be funny, but I've never, I've never like looked into how to write comedy, like how to like hit the beats and things like that. It's just a mixture of the way that I live my life is funny to other people, and I also enjoy humor. So I think that those two things combined end up making a comedy book. And especially initially when I first wrote the manuscript, people kept calling it a comic novel, and I'd never heard that expression before, and I thought they meant like graphic novel.
Oh, I see.
I was like, no, it's not.
I wonder how you feel about, I suppose, that idea of it being put into not a genre, but as you say, that when somebody describes it as a comic novel, how do you feel about that? Are you happy with that, or are you like, well, no, actually, I want it to be taken seriously? Because of course, there is this thing where humor can often be a way of actually sharing very important, serious, and as you were hoping, sad things.
Yeah, I think that there's a balance of that. Like, obviously, like, I really like people saying that it's like funny and joyful. It made them happy and stuff. I don't really like it when people are like, it's a really easy beach read. Or, being an author in the modern times, you get tagged in so many things. And sometimes you're like, oh, don't tag me in like your like breezy romance reads of the summer or whatever. Just I'm a serious woman. And especially you're kind of less aware of that like as you're writing, but when you sort of move into the publishing phase and then you're seeing like different blurbs and different covers that you're not yourself coming up with, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm being misinterpreted here, or maybe my writing like exists in a sphere that I don't intend it to, or things like that. But yeah, it's definitely like a balance of what you think you're doing and what other people think you're doing, and then trying to like meet in the middle somewhere.
Yeah. I don't know how you feel about your UK cover, but I have to say, as soon as I saw it I think it was in an email somewhere, I was like, I love that cover.
Yeah, the cover is that cover is great, and it's the same in the US as well. But that was a long process to get to that cover.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Hanako, I want to come back to you now. A bookseller called Emily, who's based in Piccadilly, where I work, says Hanako Footman knows exactly when to tell you, when to show you, and when to hold back and let you read between the lines. Oh. And you have this interweaving narrative in your novel. And so that seems, I'm always fascinated by this thing of how authors know what to hold back and when to let the reader discover it. It's very skillful and particularly, I think, hard for a debut writer. So tell me a little bit about how you approach that sort of way of writing and knowing when to tell people, when to show people.
Yeah, I sort of found my way through it, really. I guess I'm very led by my characters. So at a point they become very real for me, and so I listen to them. And sometimes I try and do something that I think will work. So, for example, there was a scene in the pilot that I tried to put into the book, and May kept being like, "What are you doing? I wouldn't do that. That's not right. Stop trying to make that a thing. It's not a thing." So really, it was about just listening to the women, and then sort of trying to have a bird's eye view and try and see all the threads in the narratives and try and kind of bring them together in a cohesive way. But it took some good years to try and figure it all out. But it was a quite pleasurable experience. And, if I was coming up against an issue and I didn't really know where I was going, I would just step away from it. And then, things start to trickle in, and Yuki will be like, "I think it's this," or an image, Hanako will appear to me, and this sounds like I'm sort of like having a sort of spiritual experience, which in a way I kind of was. I think when you're writing, you are kind of like in communion with something else. But yeah, it was very like image based, and I don't know about you guys how the other writers work, but for me, more often than not, I will see something, and then that will allow me to move forward in the story.
I wanted to ask a little bit about booksellers, because as I said, this is a prize which is absolutely driven by booksellers and what they love. And because you're all at sort of almost slightly different stages, even though these are debut novels for you, I wondered a little bit about what it means, I suppose, to have that support from booksellers, or indeed the interactions you might have already had with booksellers. Rebecca, you mentioned that your book's already been out for a while in New Zealand. What is it like to have this sort of, I suppose, this boost for the book now in the UK with UK booksellers?
Oh, it's amazing, especially because I'm not there and I haven't been in the UK. I haven't left New Zealand since the book came out internationally. So I haven't gone around and like met anyone or, sort of like done bookshop tours or anything. So it was just like, yeah, it was really, really surprising to me that I would still get their like vote of support without sort of having done that. And I think that's really like what I've seen here as well, is that booksellers just have so much power to make and break books, because, a lot in publishing is determined before a book comes out, like what the publicity push is going to be, what the budget is, whether this is a lead title or not. And then, booksellers can just sort of choose anything and recommend it, hand sell it to people.
Yeah. Hanako, I'm going to come to you now, because obviously your book has been out for a bit. What's your experience been like with booksellers, and what is it like to have their support right now?
It's honestly been amazing. Going into a bookstore and meeting the people who've been putting it into people's hands is just incredible, because it really is up to those guys to decide, which book they want to get behind. And I find it so moving when I meet someone and they've, a stranger, a bookseller who I've never met before, will come up to me and be like, "I love your book and I'm sharing it with everyone," or they'll message me on Instagram, and it's really amazing. And it makes me emotional, because it was, Mongrel wasn't a book that a lot of people said that commercially wasn't viable, and it got rejected like time and time again before we found a home for it at Footnote. And so, we thought it would be quite a quiet release, but it's really been the booksellers who've gotten behind it, and they've allowed it to really blossom into what it is now and what it is blossoming into. It just means the world.
And Josie, you're just about to embark on this whole journey with booksellers. What is it like, to have this big boost right at the outset?
It's so incredible. Booksellers are the most passionate and inspiring readers, and I've always relied on them to come with the best recommendations. So it all feels life-changing. I'm so honored and I'm so grateful. I remember my agent saying to me a while ago, you need to figure out for yourself what success looks like when you are happy, that you're not always sort of striving, for the next thing. And I sort of feel this is it. I mean, I can't imagine a better award to be shortlisted for is to be shortlisted by the guys who know everything about books. I mean, that just feels incredible. It's wonderful.
Fantastic. Well, listen, it has been a real privilege and a joy for me to speak to the three of you about your books. I'm going to hold them up to the camera so that viewers can see what they look like and where to find them in the shop. So we have Josie Ferguson's The Silence in Between. We have Hanako Footman's Mongrel. And we have Rebecca K. Riley's Greta and Valdin with its fabulous little cover. Thank you, all three of you. It's been a real pleasure. We will wait with bated breath to see what happens in terms of a winner. But it's just fantastic to have these books to talk about and to see such passion and love for them out there in the shops. So the best of luck to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.